The darkness Marcus Elijah Brandt lived in was not empty. It was textured, layered, alive with information most sighted people never bothered to collect. He had learned this truth 14 years ago in Kandahar, 3 hours after a pressure wave from an IED sheared his optic nerve at its root and turned color and light into a permanent, absolute absence. Not the blast itself. He'd been 40 meters away, attending a forward field briefing because he'd believed, then as now, that certain things required physical presence to understand. The darkness arrived without ceremony. One moment he was reading a tactical map. The next, the map was gone, and so was everything else, and the world became sound and texture and the weight of air against his skin. He grieved what he had lost for approximately 4 months. Then he adapted, with the rigor of a man who had spent 31 years being paid to adapt to things that had no interest in his preferences. United Flight 606, O'Hare International to Reagan National, departed gate H-14 at 6:12 on a Tuesday morning in November. The aircraft was a Boeing 737-800, and Marcus knew this not from the announcement but from the particular timbre of the engines during taxi. A sound he'd catalogued across enough flights that aircraft types had become distinguishable the way chess openings become distinguishable to a student who has studied long enough. His seat was for a first-class left aisle, the kind of position he preferred for the geometry of egress it offered. He had booked it himself, through the airline's accessibility line, without drama. He was 67 years old and built like a man who had once been required to pass a physical fitness test every 6 months and had simply never stopped preparing for the next one. 5 feet 10, with a posture that military service had calcified into something architectural. Shoulders level, spine plumb, head neither inclined toward nor retreating from whatever was in front of him. His face carried the cartography of a life spent making difficult decisions in rooms where the decisions mattered. The deep lateral crease from his left nostril to the corner of his mouth, the silver hair cropped so close at the sides that his ears seemed to emerge from his skull like deliberate structural features. His dark-lensed glasses were wire-framed, unornamented. His hands, large, deliberate, unhurried, settled onto armrests and tabletops with the certainty of objects that had been placed, not set down. He wore a charcoal wool blazer over a white Oxford, dark slacks. Oxfords resoled twice because they fit correctly and he had no interest in relearning a shoe. His soft leather briefcase, the color of old mahogany, was stowed under the seat ahead of him. Inside it, among 12 pages of prepared testimony and a legal pad covered in braille notes, was a travel chess set. Aluminum pieces on a folding magnetic board with raised dots on every square so his fingertips could read the position. He had been a Grandmaster for 9 years. He had taken up the game seriously after Kandahar, when he needed something that rewarded the kind of attention he now paid to the world, patient, systemic, oriented entirely toward the invisible architecture of consequence. He was going to Washington for a closed hearing before the Congressional Subcommittee on Defense Oversight. His testimony concerned $11 billion in defense procurement fraud across 3 contractors and 2 fiscal years. 3 weeks of evidentiary work distilled into measured language. He had done this many times. He did not need to think about it until tomorrow morning, and he intended not to. The flight attendant who brought his pre-departure coffee was named Renata. He knew this from the gate agent's greeting and confirmed it from the name pin. She touched his wrist first so he'd know where the cup was, without being asked, and the cup had a lid. He thanked her by name, which she registered, because people who paid attention to names were worth paying attention to. In 4B, a man named Gerald had settled in with the rapid efficiency of a frequent flyer. His laptop open before the tray table had fully extended. In 3A, a woman named Patricia had boarded with a sleeping toddler draped across her shoulder, and the child's soft exhalations were already audible above the cabin's low machinery. The aircraft smelled of sanitizing solution and someone's dark roast and the particular synthetic musk of recycled air. Not unpleasant to a man who had logged 140,000 miles in the last decade. Captain Raymond Haas introduced himself over the intercom in the unhurried baritone of a man who had circled this continent several thousand times and found it largely predictable. Clear skies, 1 hour 52 minutes. Smooth ride above the cloud layer. The safety demonstration unfolded with the rhythm of liturgy. The engines deepened. The aircraft began to move. Then, from the jet bridge, from the sealed door's threshold, actually, where he could hear the handle mechanism being held open past its normal cycle, came a voice that cut through the cabin hum the way a fire alarm cuts through sleep. Not loud, precise. The voice of someone who had long confused volume with authority and found one a serviceable substitute for the other. I was told first class. I was explicitly told first class. The door sealed behind her 2 seconds later. Her name was Vanessa Greer Hollowell, and she moved through the first-class cabin the way pressurized water moves through a narrow pipe, without hesitation, without option, assuming the space ahead would simply yield. She was 49 years old. She wore a bone-white Bottega Veneta blazer with padded shoulders over a silk blouse the pale gold of old champagne, and her luggage was Rimawa, the champagne pink edition, monogrammed. Her Hermes scarf was knotted at her neck with the practiced casualness of a woman who had rehearsed it. Her Cartier sunglasses, the gold-framed oval ones, were pushed into her highlighted hair as though she'd forgotten a camera might be waiting. She was 5'7" and moved as though she were 5'10", and the sound of her heels on the boarding bridge, heel first, each step a small declaration, had preceded her through the door by 3 full seconds. Before she reached her seat, Marcus had assembled a taxonomy of her from sound alone. The Rimawa wheels on carpet have a particular rolling frequency. The heavier the bag, the lower the pitch. Her breathing came slightly elevated, not from exertion but from the particular metabolic burn of sustained dissatisfaction. Her footsteps stopped at row 3. She looked at 3B the way a person looks at a restaurant table that isn't by the window. "This can't be right," she announced, to no one and to everyone. Renata materialized at her elbow with the smooth economy of long practice. "Can I help you find your seat? I specifically requested a window seat when I booked. I have the email." The phone appeared as though it were evidence in a case she was already prosecuting in an internal courtroom where she had secured a favorable verdict. "Your booking confirmation shows 3B, Renata said. "It was the seat selected at." "I know what the booking confirmation shows. What I'm telling you is that the seat selection process on your website is broken. It doesn't function. I have reported this before. I know Craig Pemberton, your SVP of Customer Relations. I have had dinner with Craig twice, and what I booked and what I received are categorically not the same thing." Patricia in 3A had gone very still. In 4B, Gerald removed one earbud. "Let me see what I can do," Renata said, her voice not altered by a single degree. "If you could just take your seat for now while we complete." "For now," Vanessa repeated. The phrase landed like a thrown object. She sat. She stood immediately back up and turned her attention to the overhead bin above row 3, which was nearly full. She pushed 2 bags aside with the flat of her hand, forcing a black canvas duffel, which belonged to the quiet man in 3C, to an angle it resisted. "That doesn't fit," the man in 3C said. "It fits fine," Vanessa said. "You've overpacked." She sat back down. She crossed her legs. She allowed her gaze to move through the forward cabin with the restless dissatisfaction of a person who had decided, before boarding, that everything would disappoint her. And then her eyes tracked to 4A, to Marcus, to his white cane, folded in the seat pocket, red tip visible above the fabric. She was quiet for 4 seconds. Marcus counted them. "Excuse me," she said. He turned his face toward the sound of her voice. "Are you traveling alone?" The question was engineered to sound like concern and functioned as an accusation. "I am," Marcus said. "And the airline is aware that you're—" The pause was not diplomatic. It was searching for a vocabulary she had decided she'd earned the right to deploy. "That you have a disability?" "They are," Marcus said. "Because I would have thought they'd assign someone to—" She gestured vaguely at the space around him. "Seat you somewhere more appropriate, where there's more room to manage." Marcus turned his face forward. "My seat is appropriate," he said, with the flatness of a man who has designated this sentence the last one. It was not the last one. Over the next 40 minutes, before the engines even achieved cruising altitude, she complained about the cabin temperature, requested and then rejected a blanket after Renata had retrieved it, inquired twice about delays in tones that implied she considered them personal affronts, and audibly sighed at her laptop battery with such engineering precision that the sound reached every row within 4 of her. She watched Renata bring Marcus a coffee refill, covered cup, wrist touch first, with the focused attention of a person calculating grievance. "Why does he get a covered cup?" she asked, at a volume the entire forward section could hear. "I asked for tea 15 minutes ago." "Your tea is coming right now," Renata said. "I'm simply asking about the priority system. There seems to be one that I haven't been informed of. We accommodate passengers with different needs." "Everyone has needs," Vanessa said. "I have needs. I just don't understand why his take precedence over mine." She looked directly at Marcus as she said it. Not at his face, at his cane. They were at 31,000 feet when it happened. The seatbelt sign had been off for 42 minutes. Gerald had both earbuds back in. Patricia had fallen asleep with her toddler against her shoulder, the child's mouth open, one small sneaker dangling. Sujin in 6D, who had boarded with a paperback and the quietly contained energy of someone accustomed to long flights, was reading with the particular stillness of a person fully absorbed. The cabin had achieved the specific quiet of early morning transit. Exhaustion and altitude working in concert to reduce conversation to its minimal, necessary forms. Renata brought Vanessa her tea. Finally, ceramic cup, standard first-class service, placed on a small tray. And Vanessa reached for it with the irritated haste of a person who blamed the tray for not arriving sooner, and in doing so knocked the entire assembly, cup, saucer, small ramekin of cream, sideways, forward, across the narrow divide between rows 3 and 4. Marcus felt it before he could process it. A sheet of liquid heat across his left forearm and the lower quadrant of his lapel, immediate and absolute, his nerve endings firing in a cascade from wrist to elbow. Not scalding, approximately 160 degrees serving temperature, but on skin, unambiguous in everything it communicated. He went completely still. The cup hit the cabin floor with a sound like a starter pistol. Ceramic on thin carpet over aluminum. A hard, clean crack that silenced the forward cabin in the same instant. The saucer came apart in 2 clean pieces. The liquid spread in a brown arc across Marcus's sleeve, dripped from the armrest in a thin, continuous line. Gerald yanked out both earbuds. Patricia startled awake and pulled her child closer without yet understanding what had disturbed her. In 6D, Sujin put her book face down in her lap. Her hands, Marcus would later learn, began to shake. "Oh my God!" Vanessa said it in the tone of someone who had been handed a minor inconvenience. "That tray is completely unstable. I've been managing a defective tray this entire flight. That is an airline liability issue. That is a design defect." Marcus had both hands flat on his thighs. He was breathing through his nose, slow and regular, in the same rhythm he used when calculating deep into a complex endgame, when the board offered too many variables and the temptation was to move before the position was understood. The heat on his arm was significant. He did not touch it. Renata was there in seconds, her hand on the armrest above his shoulder, her voice dropping to something direct and clinical. "Sir, are you burned? Tell me." "Left forearm. Surface. I'm all right. I need to get you a cold compress." "Yes, thank you. And I'll need to." "Excuse me." Vanessa had stood. She stood in the aisle 3 feet from Marcus with the controlled fury of a woman constructing an alternative version of events in real time. "I would like someone to acknowledge that I have also been burned. Hot tea on my hands. On my actual hands. I don't see anyone rushing to care for my hands." "Ma'am," Renata began. "He is sitting in an aisle seat. He had a cane extending into the aisle. I have been navigating around that cane since we boarded. If this is anyone's..." She paused. She looked at Marcus, who had not turned toward her, who was sitting with his hands on his thighs and his face forward and his left sleeve wet with her tea. "If this is anyone's fault, it belongs to him. He shouldn't have equipment in the aisle. The aisle is for everyone." The cane was folded in the seat pocket. Gerald was looking at the seat pocket. His mouth was slightly open. "The cane is folded," the man in 3C said quietly. "It was out earlier. I saw it." "You!" She turned and pointed at Sujin. "You were here the whole time. You saw the cane in the aisle." Sujin said nothing. You people believe that a disability gives you unlimited claim on everyone else's consideration, and the rest of us are expected to simply accommodate it without limit or complaint. Well, I've had it. Her voice had climbed past its normal ceiling, finding a new register. I've had it with this double standard. He should not be in first class without an attendant. That is a safety issue. That is a genuine liability for this airline, and I want someone to take a formal statement from me right now because I intend to pursue this. To pursue it, Gerald said. Your tea. Vanessa turned to him. You're describing suing an airline, he said. Because your tea spilled on the man it burned. I did not spill. The tray was defective. Renata's voice came without ceremony. It was the voice of a person whose training had crystallized, in this moment, into something harder and cleaner than ordinary speech. Ma'am, sit down. Lower your voice. Understand that what has occurred here is being documented in full. Document him. Document the tray. Don't stand there looking at me. I am documenting everything that has happened. I want to speak to the captain. You will not be speaking to the captain. I have a right to. You have a right to be seated and quiet, or this crew will discuss with you the alternatives available under federal aviation regulations. Vanessa sat, the way a person sits who intends to stand back up shortly. And then she looked at Marcus, at the side of his face, at his profile, at the wet stain spreading down his lapel, and she said, quietly enough that only the first 4 rows could hear her. He shouldn't have been here anyway. People like that, they get upgraded, and then they become everyone's problem. That's what this actually is. That's the real story. The forward cabin went very quiet. Marcus's right hand moved, slowly, with the precision of a man who has learned to make his hands precise in the absence of sight. He reached into the inner pocket of his blazer. What he removed was a bifold credential case, black matte leather, carrying an aluminum insert that made it sit slightly heavier than an ordinary wallet. He held it in both hands without opening it. He turned his face, not toward Vanessa, but toward the aisle behind him, as though addressing a specific person he knew to be seated there. Marshal Defoe, he said, not loudly, the way you address someone in the same room when you know exactly where they are. 1 beat of silence. From row 7, the man who had been holding a paperback thriller open without turning a single page since departure, came a voice. Yes, sir. The cabin rearranged its attention completely. The man from row 7 stood. 6 feet, mid-40s, gray fleece, dark jeans, the build of a person whose fitness was functional rather than decorative. His badge came out from inside his jacket with the deliberate economy of hands that knew exactly where to find it. Federal Air Marshal Service, gold shield, photo and name in black and white. He didn't display it so much as make it available for observation. Marcus opened his credential case and held it above the seat back where the forward cabin could see it. The seal on the left panel was the Department of Defense, eagle, shield, olive branch, embossed in gold on dark blue field. On the right panel, beneath his photograph in sharp relief and his name in raised block letters. Senior Deputy Inspector General, Office of the Inspector General, U.S. Department of Defense, Federal Law Enforcement Authority. Deputy Inspector General Marcus Elijah Brandt, he said. He said it the way you say a thing that requires no elaboration. The cabin received this the way a courtroom receives a verdict. Gerald made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Sujin put her hand over her mouth. Patricia, holding her sleeping child, looked from the credential to the folded cane in the seat pocket and back to Marcus's face, and something in her expression completed a slow, entire rotation. Vanessa Greer-Hollowell's face, in the 5 seconds that followed, moved through every stage of a reckoning she had not prepared for. The confusion arrived first, her brow contracting, her eyes narrowing, the word "what" shaping itself at her lips without sound. Then the rapid processing, her gaze moving from the credential to the marshal's badge to Marcus's profile. Then the attempted reframe, I don't see what this has to. Then the recognition, her mouth closing, opening, closing again. Then the foreclosure, the moment she understood that the narrative she had been building since the jet bridge had collapsed at its foundations and taken its exits with it. She looked at her hands in her lap, and in those 3 seconds said nothing, and the silence was complete. Marshal Defoe walked the aisle with the unhurried purpose of someone for whom this action carries no adrenaline. It is simply what comes next. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm Federal Air Marshal Defoe. I'm asking you to stand." "I didn't know." "Please stand, ma'am. I didn't know who he was." "That is genuinely not relevant to what I'm asking you to do." She stood. "You are being detained for questioning related to interference with a flight crew, conduct creating a safety risk aboard this aircraft, and physical contact causing injury to a federal officer engaged in his official duties. Do you understand?" The words fell through the cabin like stones through still water, clean, specific, going to the bottom. "I want a lawyer," Vanessa said. "You have that right. That process begins when we land." Captain Haas's voice came over the intercom, measured and without drama. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Haas. We are continuing to Reagan National on schedule, where law enforcement will be meeting us at the gate. Thank you for your patience." The cabin exhaled. Marcus folded the credential case and returned it to his inner pocket. His hands returned to his lap. His left sleeve was still wet. Renata had already brought a cold compress and a clean linen, had placed the compress against his forearm with quiet care, and he had let her do it. "Inspector General Brandt," she said, close and low. "I am so sorry this happened." "You did everything right," he said, "from the first moment. I want that on record." He paused. Then, for the first time, he turned his face toward Vanessa Greer-Hollowell. "You said," he began, and his voice was not heated, not loud, not the voice of a man with a point to make, but the voice of someone who has spent 2 decades choosing words for their precision. "That people like me shouldn't be in first class. So let me tell you what people like me are." He breathed out slowly. "I was on this flight because I am testifying tomorrow before a congressional subcommittee about $11 billion in defense procurement fraud. I have been conducting federal oversight work for 22 years. I lost my sight in Kandahar 14 years ago at a forward briefing that I attended because I believed being present mattered more than being comfortable." He stopped. "What you said today and what you did, and the assumptions that made both of them possible, those are yours to carry. The Department of Justice and this airline will determine what comes next." He turned his face forward. He said nothing further. In 4B, Gerald began to clap. Slowly, at first tentative, the applause of a man checking whether he was alone in this. He was not. Sujin joined. Then the man in 3C, and then Patricia, who shifted her child to one arm to free a hand and clapped it against her own knee. It moved backward through the cabin in a wave. Not thunderous, not a stadium sound, but steady and sustained, the way rain is sustained, the kind that continues after you've stopped expecting it to. Renata stood in the galley doorway. She pressed her fingertips briefly against her lips. Then she straightened and let the moment be what it was. From 5D, a girl of 7, dark braids, window seat, her face arranged in the serious attention of a person who understands something significant is happening, asked her mother, "Mom, why is everyone clapping?" Her mother said, "Because someone told the truth, baby." Marshal Defoe secured Vanessa Greer-Hollowell's wrists. She walked the aisle of the 737 toward the forward door. She passed Gerald, who was looking at the back of his seat. She passed Patricia's sleeping toddler, who slept through all of it, one sneaker still dangling. She passed Sujin, whose eyes were back on her book and not moving. She passed rows 9 through 12 in a silence that was not neutral. It was the particular silence of people who have collectively decided there is nothing useful to add to what has already been said. At the threshold of the forward door, she turned once. Not to speak, not to look at anyone. The involuntary turn of a person crossing a threshold they cannot uncross. Then she was gone. The door sealed behind her with its hydraulic hiss, the same sound as every other closure, indifferent to what it separated. The cabin held still for 3 seconds. The air pressure equalized. The overhead bins settled. The aircraft resumed being simply itself. Reagan National came up beneath the clouds at 9:43 in the morning. Through the oval windows, the Potomac caught November light in long, flat silver panels. The Capitol dome sat small and white in the middle distance. Marcus heard the landing gear extend, that familiar mechanical shuddering that meant the ground had become a specific, proximate intention. He had his travel chest set open in his lap. He'd set it up 38 minutes after Vanessa was removed, working from memory, rebuilding the position from the 36th game of the 1972 Fischer-Spassky match, the one he returned to when his mind needed something with traction. Not the most famous game, but the one that mattered to him. The one where Fischer, down and seemingly lost, made a queen sacrifice that looked irrational and was, in fact, the only correct move available. He ran his fingertips over the board without placing any new pieces. He simply touched it. At Reagan National, Terminal B, Gate 14, Vanessa Greer Hollowell was met by 2 Metropolitan Police Department officers, a United Airlines ground security coordinator, and an assistant from the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Virginia, who was present not for the airline side matters but for the federal ones. The criminal complaint, 3 counts, filed before the aircraft reached the gate. Assault on a federal officer, interference with a flight crew under 49 U.S.C. Section 46504, and disorderly conduct endangering aircraft safety, carried a bail hearing set for the following morning. United Airlines issued a statement by 2 o'clock that afternoon. A lifetime ban confirmed, a review of disability accommodation protocols announced, a direct apology extended to Inspector General Brandt by name. Renata stopped at row 4 on her final walkthrough, the cabin now largely empty. "Can I bring you anything?" she asked. "I'm fine," Marcus said. His cane was unfolded, its tip resting against the carpet. "One thing." "Yes." "Your incident report. Make sure Defoe's cooperation is documented. And yours." "I'll make sure of it," she said. She started to say something else. She decided against it. She moved on toward the galley. Marcus sat alone in the emptied first-class cabin and listened to the aircraft become quiet around him. The ground crew outside, the vehicles and tugs and the mechanical particularity of the jet bridge extending. The low voice of Patricia somewhere back in coach explaining to her daughter what you do when you land at an airport you don't know. He listened to the plane settling, the small incremental pressure adjustments of a fuselage releasing its passenger weight, each departure an almost imperceptible shift. He folded his chest set piece by piece, without hurrying, and returned each piece to its slot. Outside the oval window above seat 4A, the Potomac was still catching the light.